Greetings, everybody. It's Monday, and welcome to Devotions. Today, I want to tell you one of my favorite Bible stories. It is the story of Esther. And it happened in Persia long, long ago, what we today would call Iran. And the king of Persia was a man named Xerxes, King Xerxes. And King Xerxes loved to throw parties that went on for days and days. Well, at one of his parties, it had been going for 7 days now, and the men were really well and truly in their cups. And he decided that he would invite his queen, Queen Vashti, to come to the party so that all the men could see what a beautiful wife he had, because she was a beautiful woman. So Queen Vashti was instructed to go. But of course, being a self-respecting woman, she refused. There was no way she was going to go into that environment. The king was furious, and he said to his friends, "What must I do?" And their reply was, "Well, if your wife, and you're the king, doesn't obey you, imagine what our wives are going to be like. They're going to say, well, if the queen doesn't obey the king, why should we obey you? So best you just divorce her." And that's exactly what he did. But the king became lonely. And so his friends said to him, "We are going to find you another wife." So they scoured the countryside, and they found all the beautiful girls that they thought were suitable, and they brought them to the palace. They prepared them 6 months of one kind of makeup and cosmetic treatment, and then 6 months of another kind of treatment. And finally, they were brought to the king one by one. And among those girls was a Jewish woman, a young woman, very beautiful, called Esther. And that was the king's favorite. Now, she happened to be a cousin of a man called Mordecai, who was a Jew who was living in Susa, which was the capital city of Persia. Well, once the queen, Esther, had been enthroned, Mordecai became an official in the king's court. And one day, when he was wandering around, he overheard a plot by two men who were very angry with the king about something, a plot to kill the king. Immediately, Mordecai went to Queen Esther and said, "This is what's happening." And so the news was relayed to the king, and he discovered them, and they were put to death. This was then recorded in the history of Persia, in their annals, as it were. Well, there was another man in Susa, the capital of Persia at the time, and his name was Haman. And he had been appointed to the highest position in the land under the king. And the king had told everybody, you must honor Haman. Whenever he walks past you, you need to bow your knee and you need to show him respect. But Haman had a problem, because when he walked past Mordecai, Mordecai refused to bow or to show him that kind of respect. And so he stopped and confronted him and said, "Why are you behaving like this?" He said, "Well, I'm a Jew, and I don't bow to any man. I bow to God." Well, Haman, of course, was furious. And so he got together with some of the other officials, and he says, there are people in this nation who are refusing to obey the king and refusing to honor me. We need to instruct that they be put to death. And so a letter was written, and it was taken to the king. And they said, this is what we would like to send out, because these people are not obeying you, and they're not honoring our customs. And so the king said, fine, and he put his seal on it, and it was sent out. And so the day was set for the killing of all of the Jews. A letter, of course, came to Mordecai. And when he discovered what was happening, he informed Esther. And Esther sent a message back, nobody can go in to see the king, because if they go without permission, they'll be put to death. The only exception is if the king stretches out his arm and holds his scepter in his hand, then you will know that you're welcome. And Mordecai sent a reply, well, maybe, Queen Esther, you were born for such a time as this, and you were made queen for such a time as this. And so she went into the king's chamber, not knowing what would happen. And wonderfully, he turned around with his scepter in his hand and stretched it out, and he said, my queen, can I do for you? And she said, I would like to make a request. I would like to invite you and Haman to dinner. And so that's what she did. She prepared a beautiful dinner, invited the king and Haman. And Haman was very chuffed that he'd been considered so important. And at the end of the dinner, the king said, is there anything else I can do for you, my queen? And she said, well, yes, I would like you to come tomorrow night again. Well, now Haman was really excited. And so he left, but on the way out, he walked past Mordecai, who refused to bow down to him. When he got home, he was so angry, he said to his wife and to his friends, what must I do? And they said, you need to put him to death. So why don't you build a high tower, and then after you have had your dinner tomorrow, you can put him to death. Okay, so, well, that night the king had difficulty sleeping. And he asked one of his officials to read him some of the history stories of Persia. And one of the stories was how this man had saved the king from the plot to assassinate him. He'd forgotten about that. They said, who is this man? He says, he's Mordecai. And how have we honored him, said the king. Well, we haven't done anything yet. And so they said, tomorrow we'll sort it out. So he called in Haman and said, what would we do? How would we really honor someone who had saved the king's life? And he said, well, you would put him on the king's horse, and the most important man in the land would lead him around in royal robes so everybody could see. And so Haman said, well, that's what I want you to do for Mordecai tomorrow. And so Haman had to lead him all over the capital city of Susa. Well, that night they went to dinner. And the king once again said to his queen, what can I do for you? Well, said the queen, there's a plot to kill all of my people. Somebody has organized this, and a letter has been sent out. Who has done this? Said the king. Well, Haman, who is having dinner with us tonight. And the king was so furious, he ordered that Haman should be executed on the very pillar that he had built for the execution of Mordecai. And so Queen Esther said to the king, now we need to send out another letter telling all the people that they are not to put the Jews to death. And the king said, that is my pleasure. Here is my ring. Put my seal on that letter. So that was the end of Haman. And isn't it wonderful how when we read the story, how God uses the events that human beings seem to be organizing to fulfill his own purposes. God interacts with us in our lives as well, in the small details and in the big things. May God bless us as we ponder on this story. Bye for now.